Top 10 Best American Dad Episodes. In this list I will be counting down my top 10 favourite American Dad episodes, but please keep in mind that this list is personal to me, so some of your favourite episodes may not be in it. I'd like to hear what your top 10 favourite American Dad episodes are, so please leave it in the comments. I personally like American Dad far more than Family Guy because it has more likeable characters and doesn't rely on cutaway gags to fill out the episode. That doesn't mean I don't like Family Guy. I do, I just prefer American Dad. One of the reasons I like American Dad is how dark it goes with its humour, and it doesn't try and shy away from it either. You can watch American Dad on TBS, it's currently airing its 12th season. If you are unable to watch the show on TBS, as I know a lot of people are, you can buy the DVDs. Anyway, without any further delay, here is what I think is the top 10 best American Dad episodes. Number 10, Great Space Roaster. In this episode, Roger asks the family to roast him, and they do, but Roger doesn't take it too well. After a bunch of near-death situations, the family are convinced that someone's trying to kill them. Roger plays along for a while, but eventually admits he's the one trying to kill them. Which ends with Roger making the family roast each other, and it turns out Roger didn't consider himself family, but the Smiths admit that he is one of them. What I like about this episode is how Roger can take something so small and make it into something much bigger than it has to be. No matter the episode, Roger always seems to be entertaining in some way, which is why he's my favourite American Dad character. I also think that him taking things too far has never gotten old up to this point. Number 9, Rapture's Delight. I'm guessing most people were expecting this to be number 1, or at least top 5. In this episode, the rapture has begun, but Stan and Francine are left behind. Francine and Stan have a fight, and then Francine starts dating Jesus. There is then a time cut to the apocalypse, and Francine has been taken by the Antichrist. Jesus tells Stan, and they both go on a hunt to save her. What I like about this episode is it's even darker than usual for American Dad. I thought the art style the puppets used to teach everyone about the rapture was great and really different from American Dad, but it still worked within the episode. The biggest highlight for this episode for me is probably how they imagined the Antichrist to look. My main problem with this episode, however, is I didn't find it as funny as some of the later entries on this list. The ending to this episode was great as well. It was emotional and action-packed. The biggest shock of this episode for me was the return of the golden turd, and it was fun seeing how mesmerised Roger was by it, even though he created it. Number 8, Tearjerker and For Black Eyes Only. James Bond is the perfect thing for American Dad to parody, as shown by these episodes. In the Tearjerker episode, Roger or Tearjerker is trying to get all the celebrities to go to his island so he can kill them or just keep them around to entertain him. But there's one catch. When people watch Roger's movie, or Tearjerker's movie, they will cry themselves to death. In For Black Eyes Only, there's a new villain around, Black Villain, who's played by Principal Lewis in this. Black Villain then kills Sexpun, or Francine, and Stan and Roger must team up to defeat him. All the character choices are great, and my favourite moment in either of these is when Tearjerker just keeps betraying Stan over and over again. Number 7, Your Debt, Your Life. This is an episode I don't see on a lot of people's lists, and I'm not sure why. In this episode, Stan kicks Roger out after he repays him for his life debt. Roger goes to ask Stan if he can move back in by paying rent, but Stan's already moved on and got Andy Dick to take his place. Since Roger is unable to convince Stan to let him move back in, Roger decides that he should put Stan in a near-death state and then save his life so he can reclaim the life debt and move back in. My favourite moment in this episode is probably the side plot with Steve, Snot, Barry and Toshi, where Barry just starts aggressively shouting down the mic, swearing and saying some over-the-top things. Number 6, Ricky Spanish. In this episode, Roger tries to make amends for all the wrong things he's done under the character Ricky Spanish. He then teams up with an old person he put in prison a long time ago to betray Steve. This is probably Roger at his absolute worst, and that's why it's so good. The character of Ricky Spanish is unforgiving and not willing to change for anyone. My favourite moment in this episode is multiple moments actually. Whenever anyone whispers Ricky Spanish, I just like seeing the flash of what horrible things Roger has done under this persona in the past. This episode could have made it 1 or 2 slots up higher on my list if it wasn't for the side plot, which I don't particularly like, with Stan and Francine. But that plot doesn't ruin all the greatness that Ricky Spanish has. Number 5, 100 AD. This episode has Stan basically putting a bounty on Jeff's head so he can stop the wedding between Jeff and Haley. There is also a small side plot with Wheels on the Leg Man, which is always entertaining, but it doesn't take up a lot of the episode. What's so great about this episode and what made it deserve to be in the top 5 is it gives a lot of the older characters a huge focus, and a big part of the episode is actually killing off 100 of the older characters, and one-off characters mainly. Seeing all the characters' different techniques of claiming this bounty is entertaining for the entire episode. There's also a small plot where Reginald fights Bullock, which is entertaining because Bullock is more vulgar than ever in it. Seeing Jeff successfully trick Stan was entertaining, as he got the money and still got to marry Haley. Kinda shocking too. Number 4, Hurricane. In this episode, a hurricane is approaching, and honestly I think this is the best of the 3 hurricane specials what Family Guy, American Dad, or The Cleveland Show had. Stan and Haley think they should stay, but Roger and Francine think they should leave. Because of this, they end up staying, and Stan keeps on making the situations worse and worse for the family. This episode's really unforgiving to its characters and really cruel, but that's what makes it entertaining. The highlight of this episode is definitely Roger drowning his girlfriend, and showing absolutely no sympathy for her. Overall, it's a fantastic episode. If I had one fault with this episode, it'd be the ending where Peter and Cleveland show up, because Peter's aware that American Dad's a show, and I don't like it when American Dad becomes aware of itself. Number 3, Best Little Horror House in Langley Falls. This episode has my absolute favourite plot of any American Dad episode. Stan decides to try and make his house scarier than Buckles by having actual serial killers locked away. The only problem? No one finds it scary, so Roger releases the serial killers, making the house completely terrifying to everyone. The killers then try to hunt down Stan, Francine, and Roger. This possibly has my favourite line in all of American Dad, where one of the serial killers calls Roger a fat grey pear, and hates him because he's a fat grey pear. Toshi ends up killing all of the serial killers, which is tied in with a side plot. But the side plot is what lowers this episode's ranking. This episode could have easily been number 2 or number 1 if it completely focused on the serial killer plot, but it doesn't. Number 2, Lost in Space. After Roger sends Jeff into space instead of him, Jeff has to try and find his way back home. However, the leader of this planet says that Jeff doesn't actually love Haley and will prevent him from leaving. Jeff then proves that he loves Haley, and the only reason the leader said he didn't was because he hates love because Roger broke his heart. This episode also introduces a great character called Sinbad, who's amusing through the entire episode. This could have easily been American Dad's movie, but they kept it short and to the point, and I respect them for that. The highlight of this episode is definitely the aliens singing Majestic. There's also a sort of sequel to this episode, but I thought I'd give it to the original episode because it makes an entire episode about Jeff great, which I didn't think they'd be able to do. Number 1, For Whom the Sleigh Bells Toll. In this episode, Steve kills a mall Santa, but it turns out that Santa isn't dead and wants revenge on the Smith family. Meanwhile, Roger meets a man called Bob Todd, who's my favourite one-off character. Bob Todd then lets the Smiths stay at his place while they hide from Santa. Santa eventually finds them, and the Smiths and Bob Todd go to battle with Santa and his elf army. There's no true highlight of this episode for me. It's so fast-paced that there's not really any spot to pick out from it. If I had to pick, I'd say the character of Bob Todd because he's just completely nuts and over the top, and it's funny no matter what he says. I highly recommend this being the first episode anyone watches American Dad if they haven't seen it, as every character feels like themselves and gets plenty of screen time to tell you what the show's going to be like. Despite being over 10 years old, American Dad still makes amazing episodes, which is quite rare for animated comedies. American Dad does have one thing that other comedies don't though: Roger. I personally think Roger is one of the best cartoon characters ever created. Anyway guys, that's all for this list. Be sure to write your top 10 favourite American Dad episodes in the comments section.